Number 1. During production on The Mummy, Brendan Fraser filmed a hanging scene that ended with him blacking out in front of the entire crew. And the way it happened stayed with people who were there. He was standing on a platform with a rope around his neck, meant to sell the danger without real risk. But the setup didn't hold. The platform dropped just enough to tighten the rope for real, and suddenly it stopped being a stunt. His air cut off while the cameras kept rolling, and at first, nobody realized what was happening. From a distance, it looked like he was performing. Then he went limp. He collapsed without saying anything, and it took a few seconds before someone ran in and cut him down. He regained consciousness, but the tone on set shifted fast. The moment stayed in the final cut, but what audiences see came out of an actual medical scare. Fraser made light of it later, but that day, it didn't feel like acting. It felt like something serious had almost gone very wrong, and everyone felt it. Number 2. To play Imhotep in The Mummy, Arnold Vosloo had to show up looking completely hairless every single day. The original plan was to wax him, but after trying it once and dealing with how painful it was, he told them he wasn't doing that again. So instead, he got up early every morning and shaved his whole body before stepping on set. That included his head, arms, chest, legs, everything. He had to do it carefully because any tiny cuts or razor bumps would mess with the makeup team's work. They needed a clean surface to apply prosthetics, body paint, and all the ancient markings that turned him into Imhotep. It wasn't a fast process. It took time and patience, and by the time filming started each day, he had already spent hours getting ready just to become the character.
Whose idea was it to shave your head to play the role?
In my research, I'd uncovered that the priests in ancient Egypt shaved not only their heads but all their body hair. And I mentioned it to Steve Summers, and he said, "Well, let's shave your head. When we do some tests for the film." The first week or so, and if I don't like the shape of your head, I'll put a wig on your head, so he looked at my head and he didn't see any bullet holes or scars or anything, and he said, "All right, let's go with a bald head."
It's one of those parts of movie making that nobody really talks about, but it made a huge difference on screen. Vosloo looked like something pulled out of a tomb, and that look came from a real daily grind that most actors never have to think about. Number 3. The lost city of Hamunaptra was built inside a real dormant volcano in Morocco, and that decision changed how the entire film looked and felt. This was not a green screen setup, not some backlot desert simulation. The cast and crew had to haul materials, cameras, and gear into an actual volcanic crater surrounded by cliffs and heat and dust, and that gave every shot its own weight. You can see it in the color of the rocks and the way the wind moves the sand, and in how the actors move through the space like they are actually discovering something buried. The lighting was unpredictable and wild, but that helped the movie. It added depth and sharp shadows and moments that would have been impossible to stage under fake conditions. That crater wasn't just a background, it was a physical presence that shaped how scenes were blocked and shot. Every corner of that place felt dangerous and forgotten. Building a city in a volcano isn't practical. It's a commitment to the world you're trying to show. And in this case, it made the place feel less like a set and more like a curse someone dug out of the ground. Number 4. The role of Rick O'Connell was offered to a string of big-name actors before Brendan Fraser ever got called in, and one by one, each of them turned it down. Tom Cruise was high on the list, Brad Pitt was considered, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck were both contacted. None of them signed on, and after enough polite rejections, the casting team moved further down the lineup. That's when Fraser entered the picture. Not as a fallback, but as someone who already had the physical presence for action roles, and the kind of timing that lets a scene breathe without losing any tension. Watch that first moment with the rope around his neck and the look on his face, and you can see exactly why it works. He doesn't pose, he doesn't lean into hero energy, he reacts like a man trying to get through something with his life and his humor intact. That version stayed with people. Cruise eventually led the 2017 reboot, but the tone had shifted and the edges were too smooth. Fraser's version still holds because it came from grit and timing and just the right kind of mess. Number 5. Dwayne Johnson's first time acting in a movie was in The Mummy Returns, and even though he only appeared for a few minutes, that moment reshaped the next 20 years of his career. He stepped in as the Scorpion King, covered in armor and backstory, and the role was all about physical presence instead of lines or dramatic build-up. At that point, most people still knew him as The Rock from WWE, and there wasn't a lot of expectation that he would transition into film, but the moment he appeared on screen, something clicked. He didn't need exposition. He brought weight just by standing there. The response came fast, and within a year he was starring in a spin-off that gave the Scorpion King a full origin story. That one short performance kicked off a film career that eventually took over entire franchises. You can watch that scene now and still feel the shift starting. He barely speaks, but the impact is already moving. That screen time launched something that never stopped growing. Number 6. In the background of one scene in The Mummy, there is a single extra walking through a crowd wearing a long, weathered cloak that once belonged to Alec Guinness during his time playing Obi-Wan Kenobi in the original Star Wars. It wasn't placed there as a reference or an Easter egg, and it wasn't meant to connect two stories across different universes. The costume department pulled it from a studio wardrobe archive, handed it off to a background performer, and moved on without drawing attention to what it was. It shows up for barely a second, lost in the flow of extras and desert light. But if you know what to look for, it registers in a strange way. That piece of fabric had already lived through one myth and ended up walking through another without any fanfare. Studios hold on to certain garments because they're durable, hand-stitched, and expensive to replace, and sometimes those pieces find new lives in movies nobody would ever think to link together. The result is a quiet overlap between two of the most iconic genre films ever made, not marked by dialogue or story, but by a robe passing from one timeline into another without saying a word. Number 7. When they shot the locust scene in The Mummy, the insects swarming the actors weren't created with CGI or added in post. They were live locusts, hundreds of them, released on set in real time while the cameras rolled. The crew brought in containers full of the bugs and let them go during the shoot, filling the air with wings, noise, and chaos that couldn't be faked. The actors had to keep performing while bugs landed on their faces, crawled across their bodies, and moved through their costumes with no clear direction. The sound was loud, unpredictable, and nearly impossible to block out, and the discomfort never left the room. Most productions would avoid anything that messy, especially when working in desert heat with unpredictable variables already in play. But the choice paid off. You can watch that scene now and see that the panic is real, not rehearsed. It's written into the way everyone moves. That moment feels like danger, not acting, and it hits harder because every part of it actually happened. Number 8. Patricia Velasquez had to wear full-body paint to play the mistress of Satedi, and that meant showing up long before anyone else, so that a team of artists could turn her into a living artifact. They painted her entire body with gold pigment and layered on symbols by hand, and that process took hours every single day before she could even start filming. The paint was heavy and sealed her skin, which made it harder for her body to regulate temperature and even harder to feel grounded in scenes that required fast movements. She became physically ill during the shoot from how much time she spent under hot lights with no ventilation, but she didn't walk off set or slow the production down. Her character appears in the film for only a few key scenes, but those appearances are impossible to forget, and part of that impact came from how fully she gave herself to the process. Nobody sees the makeup chair when they watch her walk through the palace in that first scene, but every second of that sequence came with discomfort, nausea, and a level of discipline most people would never volunteer for. That gold paint looked clean and mythic on screen, but it was unforgiving. Number 9. When the studio sent cast and crew to Morocco for The Mummy, they knew they were stepping into regions that weren't always politically stable. That meant remote shooting locations, long travel days, and local conditions that could shift quickly. So the production took out kidnapping insurance for the main actors. That wasn't just a formality, it was a calculated move based on real concerns. If anything went wrong, that policy was in place to cover ransom payments, emergency services, and response teams. These were policies designed for diplomats and CEOs, not movie stars. But when you're filming in desert zones where communication is slow and roads are unreliable, you plan for the worst. Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz, and the others didn't have armed guards following them around, but they were briefed, monitored, and covered by systems in place behind the scenes. Nobody got taken and nothing went south. But the risk was real enough for the studio to put serious money on the line. People watching the movie saw curses and scarabs and buried treasure. The people making it were tracking political reports and backup routes in case things turned fast. That layer of reality never made it into the script, but it was there the whole time. Number 10. While filming in the Moroccan desert, Brendan Fraser came close to stepping on a yellow-dotted snake that local crew warned could cost you a limb if it bit. The venom from this kind of snake doesn't just hurt, it destroys tissue fast enough that doctors sometimes have no choice but to amputate. Someone spotted it just in time and pulled Fraser back before anything happened. It wasn't a staged scene, it wasn't part of a special effects sequence, it was a real moment in the middle of the workday when the actor nearly lost a foot to a creature that didn't care who was holding the camera. The cast had been warned about wildlife, but in that kind of heat and terrain, people stopped paying attention to every rock and shadow. It's easy to forget what's out there until it moves. That moment didn't stop the shoot, but it landed hard. Everyone took a step back, literally and mentally. The movie was built on ancient threats, but that snake wasn't myth. It was just part of the landscape, waiting, and it nearly made the production a whole lot more complicated than anyone wanted.